Do you think credit unions or local community banks are a safer place to bank with? I don't trust the mega banks. Regional banks are in danger. It all depends. Some maybe, some. Look, first of all, let's be clear on what happened with Silicon Valley Bank. They made some bad loans, sure, but they had a lot of treasuries, had a lot of mortgage-backed securities that they could have held. They just didn't hedge their book. They didn't hedge their balance sheet. It's just, why didn't they do that? I don't know. Just someone asleep at the wheel. And then they didn't really factor into the equation the possibility that 90% of their depositors are tech companies, and tech companies are really struggling right now. So you would expect, any of us, if we were there in the risk management department, I think we would have said, hey, we should probably expect for the amount of deposits to go down in the future, even if they don't have a run on the bank, just because these tech companies are going to be burning cash. Or that, we've heard about all the layoffs in tech, all the struggles that they've had. Okay, well, you guys that are small business owners or business owners in general, you know how that works. When you have a tough quarter or you have a tough year, what happens to your bank account? It goes down, not up. So how they didn't see that coming and how they could own all of these T-bills or treasuries, most likely treasury that long into the curve, and not hedge that interest rate risk, knowing darn well the Fed is going to continue to raise interest rates. It's just boneheads, just asleep at the wheel, really. So, the question is, George, do I think a credit union or local community bank are safe? I don't know, because I don't know what their risk management department's doing. I don't know if they're asleep at the wheel like these knuckleheads at Silicon Valley Bank. I think the best advice I can give you is obviously diversify your bank account. If you've got working capital and you're a business, and let's say you need excess of 250, right? Because that's FDIC. Let's say you need 500,000 in the bank at all times just to cover your expenses, payroll. You've got to have that working capital in there. Okay, well, just maybe try to spread that out between a couple different banks and diversify the banks you deal with. Like, as an example, when I started doing real estate in Kansas City, I didn't know anything about macro. Nothing. Zero. I didn't even know what the Fed was. Didn't know what a treasury bill was. I barely knew what interest rates were. But I had the sense enough to say, okay, well, I've got, a decent amount of money here and it's over the FDIC limit. Okay, I need to spread that out with a few different banks. And within those banks, I'm going to go with one big bank or maybe a couple big banks, and then I'm going to go with some smaller banks. And how did I decide which small bank or small banks plural I wanted to deal with? Well, first and foremost, I went down there and talked to the people, and I was lucky enough to get a meeting with the vice president of commercial lending with this one bank who I've now become good friends with. And I just, look him in the eyes. He's a straight shooter. Use your gut, for heaven's sakes. And then ask them questions. I was drilling him on questions as to how they performed during the GFC. Because keep in mind, this is 2012. So GFC was in the very recent past. And they came out just smelling like roses. So I'm like, great. That means that you were very prudent. You managed your balance sheet very, very well. That's a bank I want to deal with, right? But then I still diversify. And if I knew today or if I would have known back then what I know today, in addition to that, anything that I had, over specific limits, and I'm going back to FDIC, I would not have needed immediately, that I could have held off. I didn't need access to it for a month or 3 months, something like that. I would have just put it in T-bills. Just put it in T-bills. You guys that have watched my channel for quite some time or that have tuned into these live streams, I get the question all the time, like, what should I do if I'm not confident in my bank? And I have had the same answer going back to 2019 when I started this channel. It's like, listen, if you got over FDIC and you're not comfortable with that, I would always preface by saying, I know it sounds crazy, but put it in T-bills. Why? Because I would prefer to have my counterparty risk with the government than XYZ Bank. And I know that sounds counterintuitive from a guy that likes small government and all these things, but hey, if I've you're going to put a gun to my head and say, what's the most prudent thing to do if I'm losing sleep at night, wondering if my bank is going to go out of business tomorrow? Take the dry powder and put it into T-bills, for heaven's sakes, and roll it over once a month. Just roll it over. Make it a part of your routine. If you need the liquidity, boom, sell it. You got it. Put it in the bank. Move it out. You've got that risk for a day or so. So I guess that's the best answer that I can give you. And there's other more sophisticated ways. Joseph Wang was talking about this on Twitter, that how on earth, I don't know the specific part department or department name for basically risk management within the bank. I think it's the treasury department or something like that. But he said this is just basic stuff. I mean, basic stuff by taking I'm sorry. He was referring to the depositors. So XYZ tech company, they should have someone that's managing their balance sheet, for heaven's sakes, and managing their assets and managing their bank accounts and their working capital. And to have those people, have all their eggs in the Silicon Valley bank basket is just absolutely unacceptable. That is unacceptable. This is third grade stuff here that we're dealing with. So I have zero sympathy for the bank, and I have zero sympathy for the depositors. I mean, shame on you. At some point, our society is going to have to go back to making people accountable for their own actions. And if you lose all your money because you thought that you were just giving your money to a bank and somehow the bank puts that money in a vault and then they just give it to you, not realizing that you're lending your money to a bank. If you're not cognizant of that as XYZ tech company, shame on you. Shame on you. Did you do anything wrong? That's what I hear on Twitter all the time. Oh, they didn't do anything wrong. Yeah, they did. They absolutely did. They weren't good custodians of their working capital. So what happens in a free market? They go bust. And then someone who was prudent with their working capital comes in and buys the assets of all the boneheads. And then the system is far stronger as a result. So I know I'm going off on a tangent there, but I think I hopefully answered your question, give you some food for thought, Tony, in case you're worried, and it sounds like you are, about what you should do with your savings. And, if you're in the FDIC, I really wouldn't worry about it too much. But if you really wanted to, you could diversify from there. And if it wasn't cash that you needed for 3 or 4 months, 6 months, something like that, for heaven's sakes, I personally would put it into T-bills. I mean, for those of you who are Rebel Capitalist Pro members, you know that I've got a what is it called? I've got an account. I've got a portfolio, a model portfolio. Excuse me. And it's got $100,000 in there, my own money. It's not like paper trading. These are things that I'm actually buying. And I said, I want to have as much dry powder as possible right now because of the yield curve and all these things I talk about on the channel. I want to take advantage of maybe some cheap opportunities in the future because I think that there's some storm clouds on the horizon. What do? 10% gold, 90% T-bills, 90%. And what I said on Twitter today is listen, again, going back to the depositors, I'm an uneducated YouTuber, for heaven's sakes. I've never taken an econ class or a finance class in my life. Never taken an accounting class. Zero. Almost flunked out of high school, for heaven's sakes. And if I know what to do, I know how to protect working capital. How is it possible that these tech companies that supposedly are full of the smartest people on the planet Earth don't know something that an uneducated hack on YouTube knows, just from a standpoint of common sense?